How are materials transported throughout the body? Laboratory 4, Bio 111L. Hi, I'm Scientist Cindy. Let's learn about the circulatory system. The three components of the circulatory system are the heart, the blood, and the blood vessels. The circulatory system, also called the cardiovascular system, functions to circulate blood through the body. The cardiovascular system has red blood cells. They carry nutrients and oxygen to the cells. The red blood cells also carry away toxins and waste products, including carbon dioxide, from the cells. The function of the heart is to pump blood around the body. The heart does this by creating a pressure gradient that forces the blood to move around the body. The function of the blood vessels is to provide the network of passageways that allows the blood to travel throughout the body. The circulatory system circulates blood around two loops. The first one is the pulmonary circuit. This brings blood from the heart to the lungs back to the heart. The second loop is called the systemic circuit. The systemic circuit brings blood from the heart to the rest of the body and back to the heart. There are two major types of blood vessels, arteries and veins. The arteries carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry blood to the heart. Be careful, not all arteries are red, and not all veins are blue. The red coloring in the illustration indicates that the blood carried in those vessels is oxygenated. The blue coloring in the illustration indicates that the blood carried in those vessels is deoxygenated. However, they are carrying carbon dioxide. In the pulmonary circuit, the heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs. These blood vessels are going away from the heart, so they are called arteries. These are called the pulmonary arteries, and they are always colored blue because the blood they carry is deoxygenated. The red blood cells then travel to the lungs where they release carbon dioxide and receive oxygen. Now that the red blood cells are oxygenated, they return to the heart to get another push before traveling through the body in the systemic circuit. These blood vessels are headed toward the heart, so they are veins, but they are colored red because the blood they carry is oxygenated. So, this newly oxygenated blood travels back to the heart through the pulmonary veins. Here in the heart, the blood gets a final push before its long trek around the body. Objectives. At the completion of your laboratory assignment, You should be able to. Describe how the different components of the cardiovascular system contribute to the transportation of substances throughout the body. Identify the pathway blood travels through the heart, lungs, and body. Identify the anatomy of the heart, including the chambers and the valves. Evaluate the risk factors and symptoms of a heart attack. Infer the general health of an individual based on their blood pressure and heart rate. Design and perform an experiment comparing blood pressure and heart rate among different classes of students. This part will be done in your lab. The circulatory system. The function of the circulatory system is to transport the blood throughout the body. The circulatory system has three components: the heart, which functions to pump blood throughout the body by creating a pressure gradient; the blood vessels, which are the network of passageways for the blood to travel through; and the blood. The blood carries the substances that are being transported to and from the cells. The blood has three major components: the blood cells, which include the red blood cells, or erythrocytes, the white blood cells, or leukocytes, platelets, which are the blood clotting factors, and blood plasma. This is the liquid background substance of your blood and makes up 60% of your blood. The red blood cells function to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the cells of the body. The red blood cells also carry away carbon dioxide, toxins, and other waste products from the cells of the body. The function of the blood vessels is to provide the network of passageways that allows the blood to travel through the body. There are two major types of blood vessels: arteries, which carry blood away from the heart, and veins, which carry blood toward the heart. Arteries branch into smaller blood vessels called arterioles. Arterioles branch into even smaller blood vessels called capillaries. The function of capillaries is to allow the exchange of substances across the capillary wall through diffusion. The capillaries will join other vessels and begin their journey back to the heart, thus forming the blood vessels called venules. The venules merge together, forming large blood vessels called veins. As the red blood cells travel through the capillaries next to the lungs, gas exchange occurs. Carbon dioxide from the red blood cells inside of the capillaries passively diffuses to the lungs due to the pressure or concentration gradient. At the same time, the lungs have just inhaled, so they are full of oxygen. That oxygen will passively diffuse from the lungs through the capillaries and enter the red blood cells. At this point, the red blood cells are now oxygenated, and they can deliver their oxygen to the cells of the body. The capillaries also allow for the diffusion of nutrients as well as oxygen from the red blood cells inside of the capillaries to the cells of the body that lie outside the capillaries. At the same time, the cells of the body will release carbon dioxide and other waste products that will be picked up by the red blood cells. The function of the heart is to pump blood around the body. The heart pumps blood around the body by creating a pressure gradient that forces the blood to move around the body. The pulmonary circuit brings blood from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart. In the pulmonary circuit, the heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs. As the blood travels by the lungs, the red blood cells will release carbon dioxide and receive oxygen. Now that the red blood cells are oxygenated, they return to the heart and get another push before traveling to the body through the systemic circuit. The systemic circuit brings oxygenated blood from the heart to the cells of the body and then returns back to the heart. As the oxygenated blood travels around the body, it delivers oxygen to the cells. It also picks up the unwanted carbon dioxide from the cells that can become toxic in high concentrations. Eventually, the red blood cells will become deoxygenated and will carry a lot of carbon dioxide. In this state, the red blood cells must return to the heart, which will send them to the lungs through the pulmonary circuit, where they can release their carbon dioxide and pick up more oxygen. What do the colors mean? The red coloring in the illustration indicates that the blood carried in those vessels is oxygenated. The blue coloring in the illustration indicates the blood carried in those vessels is deoxygenated. The heart has 4 chambers. The 2 on top are the right and left atria. The 2 on the bottom are the right and left ventricles. The word atrium comes from the Latin word for entrance. The atria, which is plural for atrium of the heart, function to receive blood. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body. The left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs. The ventricles are the 2 chambers that are going to send blood out from the heart. The right ventricle is going to pump deoxygenated blood to the lungs for the pulmonary circulation. The left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood to the body for systemic circulation. The ventricles are the muscular part of the heart, and they perform the rhythmic contraction and relaxation of the cardiac muscle that creates the pumping action of the heart. The ventricles function to send blood out of the heart. The function of the heart valves is to assure that blood flows in only one direction through the heart. When there is an increase in pressure of blood, that pressure acts to push the valve open. The valves only open in one direction, which prevents backflow and guides the blood to flow in the proper direction. The atrioventricular valves. The atrioventricular valves include the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve. The tricuspid valve allows blood to go from the right atrium to the right ventricle. The mitral valve or bicuspid valve allows blood to travel from the left atrium to the left ventricle. The semilunar valves. The semilunar valves include the pulmonary semilunar valve and the aortic semilunar valve. The pulmonary semilunar valve allows deoxygenated blood to travel from the right ventricle to the lungs. The aortic semilunar valve allows oxygenated blood to travel from the left ventricle to the aorta. The sound of the heartbeat comes from the opening and closing of the heart valves. The heartbeat begins with the lub sound, made by the closing of the atrioventricular valves that are shown here in the animation. The closing of the atrioventricular valves correspond with the contractions of the ventricles. The second part of the lupped-up heartbeat sound is made by the closing of the semilunar valves in response to the relaxation of the ventricles. What is the advantage of a stethoscope? A stethoscope can give the medical care provider information about these heart valves and their function, as well as the flow of blood through the heart. You can hear heart valve deformities, abnormalities, and heart murmurs or holes in the heart. The flow of blood through the heart. Deoxygenated blood comes from the body. Deoxygenated blood that comes from the body enters the heart at the right atrium. The blood then travels from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve to get to the right ventricle. When the right ventricle contracts, the blood is then pumped through the pulmonary semilunar valve, which leads to the pulmonary trunk or pulmonary artery. This is the beginning of the pulmonary circuit that will bring the blood to the lungs. When that deoxygenated blood reaches the capillaries next to the lungs, gas exchange occurs. The red blood cells release carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen. The newly oxygenated blood coming from the lungs travel back to the heart and enter the left atrium. The blood then travels from the left atrium through the mitral valve or bicuspid valve to the left ventricle. When the left ventricle contracts, the blood is pumped through the aortic semilunar valve, which leads to the aorta, which begins the blood's journey through the systemic circuit, in which it will travel through the body, delivering oxygen and picking up carbon dioxide. Heart attacks. The heart needs to have its own supply of oxygenated blood to continue to function. The blood destined for the heart travels there through the coronary arteries. The coronary arteries lie over the heart. The medical terminology used for heart attacks is a myocardial infarction. Blocking the blood supply to the heart is usually caused by fatty deposits, blood clots, or a thickening of the blood vessel walls or lining. The symptoms of a heart attack. Heart attacks are the leading cause of death in the United States. Some of the symptoms of a heart attack include pressure or pain in the chest that may or may not radiate down the left arm, sudden onset of nausea, dizziness, shortness of breath, or breaking out in a sudden, unexplainable sweat. Heart attack risk factors. Some of them you can control, and unfortunately, some of them you cannot. Things you can control include lack of exercise, poor eating habits, smoking or drug use, and stress. Things you cannot control are your genetics, your gender, and your age, which could contribute to your risk factors of having a heart attack. This week in lab, you will be measuring your heart rate in beats per minute and your blood pressure using a sphygmomanometer while you are at rest. You will compare your values at rest to the typical normal ranges of blood pressure and heart rates for adults. You will then calculate your maximum heart rate using the following formula. You will then calculate the low end of your target heart rate by using the formula 220 minus your age multiplied by 0.7. You can calculate the high end of your target heart rate with the formula 220 minus your age times 0.85. Next, you will collect and analyze data. Separate your classmates into groups according to gender and activity level. Record the initial blood pressure and heart rate before activity of each participant in the class. Then, each participant will perform 4 minutes of rigorous exercise. Immediately following exercise, measure and record the initial heart rate and blood pressure at time equals 0 after exercise. Measure and record the participant's pulse again at 2 minutes, 4 minutes, and 6 minutes following the exercise. Collect the data from the class and analyze. Have fun, and thank you for watching.